And welcome to KayScience's Week 9 triple revision. I can't believe we're already on Week 9. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the kidney, all right? The kidney. This is triple science. We're looking at the kidney. So let's begin with the route taken by urine from the kidney until it leaves the body, all right? So before that, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to draw the entire process for you, okay? So let's start here. What we've got is the Bowman's capsule. This here is the Bowman's capsule. And inside the Bowman's capsule, around the Bowman's capsule, you've got a set of capillaries called the glomerulus. So this here is the glomerulus. The glomerulus. Okay, so these are capillaries called the glomerulus. So this here is the glomerulus. And this here is the Bowman's capsule. So the Bowman's capsule. And what happens is inside the blood here, you've got proteins, urea, red blood cells, which I draw like that. You've got glucose, and you've got hormones, okay? And water, of course. So now, what happens in the glomerulus is a process called filtration. It's a process called filtration. So this is where filtration takes place. Filtration because substances are filtered out of the blood, and they're going to be glucose, urea, water. Those are the main three that we're going to talk about today. Okay, hormones, of course, are proteins, so they are going to probably remain in the blood. All right, so proteins, hormones. So urea, glucose, and water, they are filtered out of the glomerulus and into the Bowman's capsule because they're small molecules. Red blood cells and proteins, and hormones, they're proteins, are too large to diffuse through. So they diffuse into the Bowman's capsule, and that's where filtration takes place. Next, what we've got here is the first convoluted tubule. The first convoluted tubule. And surrounding the nephron, so this is now I'm going to draw the nephron. So this is the nephron. So now drawing the nephron, which the Bowman's capsule is the first bit. This here is the first convoluted tubule. So the glucose, water, and urea are now going to travel through the first convoluted tubule, and this is where glucose moves back into the blood. It's transported back into the blood. Okay, and that happens by active transport. Okay, so glucose is now going to be transported back into the blood in the first convoluted tubule. So this is the first convoluted tubule. So now what happens is we get to the loop of Henle. We now get to the loop of Henle. This is the loop of Henle. All right, and again, capillaries surround the nephron. In this case, this is the loop of Henle. This is the loop of Henle. The loop of Henle. Okay? The loop of Henle. And it's blood capillaries that surround it. So now we've got the loop of Henle. And as you've seen here, glucose should now have been absorbed back into the blood. At this point, we've only got water and urea. Water and urea. Because the whole point of the kidney is to reabsorb the water and make the urea exit the body, which we can get to in a minute. So in the loop of Henle, what happens is it is the water that now is transported out into the blood, out of the loop of Henle in the nephron, out into the blood. So as you can see here, the water travels by osmosis through a partially permeable membrane into the blood. And then what happens is that we now get to the collecting duct. We now get to the collecting duct, which we're going to look at in more detail later on. So this here is the collecting duct. I'm going to write that at the top here. This is the collecting duct, right? So let's go from the beginning. In the blood, in the glomerulus, capillaries that enter the Bowman's capsule, you've got the proteins, urea, red blood cells, glucose and water. Proteins and blood are too big to enter by diffusion, so only urea, glucose and water diffuse across the partial permeable membrane into the Bowman's capsule. It's where filtration takes place. Then in the first convoluted tubule, this is spelt wrong, but I'm sorry, tubule, that is where the glucose is actively transported back into the blood. Okay, so it's glucose here, all right? Then you've got water and urea that now enters the loop of Henle, where water is reabsorbed into the blood by osmosis. It's by osmosis. And now we've got urea, and not all the water is absorbed here. So now we've got urea and water in the collecting duct. And of course, surrounding the collecting duct is going to be capillaries. These are the capillaries surrounding the collecting duct. So at this point here, which we'll go into more detail later on, this is where more water is reabsorbed back into the blood by osmosis. Okay? But not all the water is ever reabsorbed. We do expel some water, all right? That is then going to be passed out, which will form urine, which is your urea and water. So now what we've got here is the ureter, which then which then transports urine to the bladder, and then this is the urethra, which I've spelt wrong, urethra, put H in there, urethra, okay, do apologise. So water and urea then pass into the bladder where urine is stored. This is urine. The ureter connects the collecting duct and the bladder. Urine is stored in the bladder, and then the urethra is where urine is passed out of the body. So that would be in a female, the urethra is next to the vagina, and in a male, the urethra is in the penis. All right, that is how it goes to the toilet. So this here is the structure of the kidney, right? So describe the route taken, all right? Describe the route taken by urine from the kidney, okay? So that could also mean the nephron. So from the kidney till it leaves the body. So I am now going to give you, using that keywords there, go. So how does it get transported from the kidney? So we know that it leaves the body here, right at this point, and it leaves the kidney at this point. So urine is going to go to the ureter, to the bladder where urine is stored, and then out of the urethra, okay? So how do you answer this question here? Describe how filtration takes place in the Bowman's capsule. So remember, what you've got to do is talk about the glomerulus here. You've got to talk about the glomerulus. You've got to talk about the Bowman's capsule, all right, and that the glomerulus is capillaries that surround the Bowman's capsule, and then urea, glucose, and water enter the Bowman's capsule by diffusion. And it's proteins and red blood cells that are carried away. So that is how filtration happens. Urea, glucose, water enter the Bowman's capsule from the glomerulus, whereby proteins and red blood cells remain because they're too large to diffuse. Right, so you have got a minute and a half to answer. Describe how filtration takes place in the Bowman's capsule using that keywords there. Go. Okay, let's begin to finish the sentence off there. Right. Describe how filtration takes place in the Bowman's capsule. So you've got urea, glucose, and water. Urea, glucose, and water. They diffuse from the glomerulus to the Bowman's capsule. Protein and red, don't write RBC, but I'm doing that for shorthand just for now. Protein, red blood cells remain in the glomerulus because they're too big to diffuse. Okay, so that is filtration. So now let's explain what happens in the loop of Henle. So remember, in the loop of Henle, urea and water enter the loop of Henle. Water is going to osmose, going to go by osmosis, going to be transported into the blood, therefore reducing the water content in the loop of Henle, in the nephron, but the urea remains in the loop of Henle. Okay, the urea remains in the loop of Henle. And then the water and the urea end up in the collecting duct. Okay, so you've got, that isn't a 6-mark question, by the way. This will probably be a 3 or 4-mark question maximum. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer this question here about what happens in this point here. Go. Okay, let's begin to end it there. So what happens in the loop of Henle? And this is not a 6-mark question, it's probably a 3 or 4-mark question. So water and urea, so I'm actually going to write it shorthand, water and urea enter the loop of Henle. Again, don't write like that, just for now. Water is reabsorbed into the blood by osmosis. Always define osmosis. It's going to be from a high to low solute concentration or water potential, either one, for a partially permeable membrane. So for a partially permeable membrane, always write that out fully. And then urea remains in the loop of Henle, and then water and urea enter the collecting duct. Okay, so that's what happens there. So let's now, so we should, oh yeah, and also let's just recap, okay? We're going to look at this in more detail in a minute, right? So we're going to do that in ADH in a minute. First convoluted tubule is where glucose is reabsorbed back into the blood, right? So this here was the kidney structure. What we're going to look at now, here is the collecting duct. Here is the ureter. Here is the bladder. And here is the urethra. Okay. What we've got here, I'm actually going to draw it like this time. What we've got here is the capillaries, the blood, where the water is absorbed into in the collecting duct. These are the capillaries. Okay. And what we've got over here, so this is happening in the kidney, in the sides of your body. Obviously, it's not drawn to scale. Okay. So what we've got up here is the hypothalamus. What we've got here is the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Okay, this is next to the brain. These are next to the brain, right? So this is not drawn to scale. So the hypothalamus detects water levels in the blood. This detects water levels in the blood. So if water levels are too low, so now as you can see here, we've got low water levels in the blood. We are dehydrated. This is what happens if we've got low water levels in the blood. This is the blood. There are low water levels. Okay, and as you can see here, inside the collecting duct, we have water and we have urea. We have water and we have urea. So the hypothalamus detects low water. Number one, hypothalamus detects water levels. The pituitary gland then secretes a hormone called ADH. The pituitary gland then secretes a hormone called ADH. Low water levels detected by the hypothalamus. Pituitary gland then secretes ADH when there are low water levels. The ADH then binds onto the collecting duct membrane. The collecting duct membrane, right? And what then happens is that it becomes more permeable, right? So it goes from this, where it is potentially not that permeable. So imagine that's the collecting duct. The collecting duct now looks like this. Okay, can you see here how it's become more permeable? So that's the collecting duct. And what we've got here next to it are the red blood cells, the blood, okay, in the capillaries, right? So can you see here that is not permeable here? Okay, not that permeable, so it's less permeable. And can you see here how it's now become more permeable? The membrane has become more permeable. There are gaps here. These show that the permeability has increased in the membrane. What does that mean? Well, if we've got water here, like that, okay, and we've got urea, And remember, we've got the ureter, the bladder, and the urethra. Because it's now more permeable, the water can now osmose back into the blood. Remember, we're dehydrated. We want this water to enter back into the blood. So that means less water is going to end up in the urine. So on a really hot day, for example, where you haven't drunk much water, you've got low water levels. The pituitary gland secretes ADH. The ADH binds the collecting duct membrane. This then increases the permeability of the membrane. Therefore, more water can travel into the capillaries, into the blood, by osmosis. Therefore, more water is reabsorbed and water levels will then increase in the blood. But here, where you might produce this much urine, because you've got water and urea, so you've got this much water. In this bladder here, can you see there's much less water in the bladder? Okay, there's a lower concentration of water, there's a higher concentration of urea, sorry. Therefore, if you're dehydrated, the water's been reabsorbed back into the blood, and less water, as you can see here, this water's ended up there, this water, this water, this water, and all you've got here is this water molecule entering there. So you're going to have less urine, okay, because there is less water in the urine. Less water in the urine. So then what happens if water levels are too high? So now let's say if water levels are too high. So let's now say it's a cold day, all right? It's a cold day and you've drunk loads and loads of water. The pituitary gland is going to secrete less ADH, all right, or no ADH or less ADH. So ADH levels will drop significantly. Therefore, the ADH will not bind the collecting duct membrane. Therefore, remember before with ADH, it was permeable. Now it becomes less permeable. Can you see here how the membrane will now become less permeable? Therefore, if you've got lots of water molecules in here, right, they are not going to be able to osmose into the blood. So these water molecules, okay, with the urea, are not able to osmose into the blood. Okay, therefore, all of these water molecules are going to enter the bladder. And what's going to happen to your urine levels? Well, your urine levels will increase because you're going to have more water in your urine because less ADH. So remember that what's happening here is that with low water levels in the blood, hypothalamus detects that, you secrete ADH, increase the permeability of the membrane, therefore more water is reabsorbed into blood by osmosis, therefore less water in the urine, so you have less urine due to less water being passed up the collecting duct. If you are hydrated, we've got lots of water in your blood, okay, less ADH, so you've got lots of water in your blood, less ADH, which means that the permeability of the membrane of the collecting duct will decrease. Therefore, water remains in the collecting duct and it will pass into the bladder for the ureter, and you have more urine due to having more water. So, I am going to give you 4 minutes to answer this question here, which is explain how ADH regulates water absorption in the collecting duct. All right, you have to talk about the hypothalamus. Let me pause that. You have to talk about the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland. If there is high water levels in the blood. If there is, you talk about ADH, the permeability of the collecting membrane. In what situation does water get transported back into the blood by osmosis? Then you have to talk about where the water ends up. So you talk about urine levels due to water levels. Okay, you've got 4 minutes starting now. Go. Right, stop there. So now let's go through the answers. So if you are dehydrated, which means water levels too low, so low water levels, all right, that means that hypothalamus detects that. The hypothalamus detects that. Hypothalamus detects that. And then the pituitary gland secretes ADH. secretes ADH, which then binds the collecting duct membrane. So don't ever write that in an exam, but I'm just doing it shorthand, the collecting duct membrane. It increases, so the ADH increases permeability in the collecting duct membrane, okay, which then increases water reabsorption by osmosis. So that means you're going to have, that's into the blood. Therefore, you're going to have less urine, okay, less urine, and it's going to be darker urine as well. Right, if you are, if water levels are too high, so now if water levels too high, that is detected by the hypothalamus again, and this time the pituitary gland secretes less ADH, which then decreases permeability of the collecting duct membrane, so just the collecting duct membrane, which then decreases water reabsorption into the blood, which then means that it's going to be more urine and it's going to be lighter urine. Okay, so that is how you would answer that question. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is kidney dialysis. All right, what we're going to look at now is kidney dialysis. So we're going to look at question 2, and this question is quite difficult in my opinion, right? So firstly, kidney dialysis is when kidney dialysis is needed when the kidney no longer works properly, okay? Because the urea remained in the blood, so you've got kidney failure. But before we do that, let's just talk about where urea comes from. So if you've got proteins here, if you've got proteins, okay, these proteins are going to be broken down, okay, into amino acids. And then these amino acids are processed in the liver, and then this is then broken down into urea. So this urea is then in the blood. So remember, how is urea formed and where does that take place? It's when proteins are broken down into amino acids, and amino acids are broken down to urea in the liver. Okay, so this could be a 2 or 3 mark question in the exam. All right, so what happens if the kidney doesn't work? So now remember, the liver forms urea and the kidney removes it from the blood, okay, which we urinate out. So this here is the kidney dialysis machine. Okay, this is the kidney dialysis machine. And I'm going to show you what happens and how urea is removed, but all the other substances are not removed. So this is a machine, okay? This here is a machine. And kidney dialysis fluid is transported into the machine, okay? And the patient's blood is, they're hooked up to this machine, and the patient's blood leaves their body, and the blood is going to enter the machine, okay? The blood is going to enter the machine here, all right? So from their body. So this is the patient's blood that is coming out of their arm. Imagine, okay, so imagine that they put a cannula in here, all right? And then the blood exits the body, and then the blood is going to exit the body like that, and it's going to go into the machine. Then the blood comes out this side, and then it goes back into the blood, into the body, like that, okay, from over here. So what is going to be in the blood? Proteins, red blood cells, water, urea, and glucose, okay, and glucose. So we need, the only thing that has to be removed from the blood here is the urea. It's the only thing we need to leave. So these enter here. Let's go through each substance first. So firstly, we need the red blood cells and the proteins to not exit the dialysis machine. We need this red blood cells to go through here, as well as the proteins. So this membrane here in the machine, okay, the proteins are too large to diffuse out, okay? The proteins cannot diffuse out of here, all right? And nor can the red blood cells. So the proteins and the red blood cells are too large to diffuse out, so they remain in the patient's blood. So we understand how proteins and red blood cells remain in the patient's blood. Secondly, the glucose, all right, glucose, if it's in too high a concentration here, okay, so let's say, in fact, let's use a different color. All right, let's use the this color here. So imagine all of this glucose here, all right. The last thing we need is this glucose to diffuse from a high to low concentration. So how do we prevent that? Well, in this kidney dialysis fluid here, it needs to have the same glucose concentration as the patient's blood, okay? Because if this dialysis fluid here, so this is the kidney dialysis fluid, has the same concentration of glucose in here as it does in here, the glucose, there'll be no net movement, okay? So the glucose will then just be transported through because it's not going to diffuse out into the dialysis fluid because there is an equal concentration on both sides, therefore there's no net movement of glucose. All right, so understand proteins and red blood cells are too big to diffuse into the kidney dialysis fluid. Glucose, the same concentration in the dialysis fluid is in the blood. Now that only leaves us with urea, all right, ignore the water. We're now going to look at the urea. So there's going to be urea here. What's the concentration of urea, do you think, in the kidney dialysis fluid? It's going to be 0, because then the urea will then diffuse into the dialysis fluid. So now all of this urea has been removed from the patient's blood into the dialysis fluid, and then this dialysis fluid is carried away. So then all of this urea is going to be taken away, and it's replaced with kidney dialysis fluid with no urea, but with glucose. So as the urea then passes through, there's going to be no urea here, and the urea can continuously be removed by diffusion from a high to low concentration. So there should be no urea here. Okay, so we know how kidney dialysis fluid removes urea but keeps other main blood components in the blood. I want you to answer that question. We need to go through one by one what the answer is. Let's start with red blood cells. Number one, red blood cells are too large to diffuse through the membrane in the kidney dialysis machine. Proteins are too large, therefore they remain in the blood. Done. The kidney dialysis fluid has the same concentration of glucose as the patient's blood. Therefore, there is no net movement of glucose out of the patient's blood. Done. We understand glucose. However, there is no urea in the kidney dialysis fluid. Therefore, urea is going to diffuse out of the patient's blood and into the dialysis fluid. But you need to state that the kidney dialysis fluid is replaced with fluid with no urea to maintain the concentration gradient. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. We understand that, and then you need to talk about replacing dialysis fluid and the reason why. So that is point 5. Okay, and you've got 4 minutes. You've got 4 minutes to answer that question. Go. Right, let's just finish it off here. So let's now go through the answers. So firstly, oops. So firstly, proteins and red blood cells, okay, are too large to diffuse out of blood into the kidney dialysis fluid. So they remain in the blood. Okay, so they remain in the blood, as you can see here. Right, kidney dialysis fluid, always write this out fully, but I'm write shorthand now. Kidney dialysis fluid has the same glucose concentration as patient's blood. So no net movement, diffusion out of blood. So the glucose remains in the blood because there's no net diffusion. Kidney dialysis fluid has no urea. That is so that the urea diffuses out of blood, okay, into the kidney dialysis fluid. And then the kidney dialysis fluid is replaced. Kidney dialysis fluid is replaced with no urea, but it's got the same concentration of glucose as you've written up here already. Okay, that is how kidney dialysis machine works. And then this blood here, so remember, this blood here, which is unfiltered, has urea in it. So this has urea in it here. This has urea. And the blood that comes back from over here has no urea. All right, so that is how that happens. Okay, and that was KayScience's Week 9 kidney tuition. Hope you enjoyed it. It's triple science only, and good luck in your exams.